Thanks, and I just want to thank all the committees. Was excellent to hear. My line here says reflections on the role of service and recovery, but I would tell you, I'm probably going to talk about reflections of the role in recovery and service, because sometimes. So I see my friend Bo in the back. It's good to see him. We've spent some painful days on the AA World Services Board in a small room, making some decisions, but one of the things I want to talk about first here is change. Because change is okay in Alcoholics Anonymous service. And maybe I'm a little bit of a fanatic on this because I was always much younger than the people I was serving with. I was 33 when I was a delegate. I was in my 40s when I was a director on the World Services Board. Those are young ages that used to not be seen, and thank God we're seeing more of them. But I want to stress that, we are not supposed to be some rigid doctrine. And I'm not talking about changing the message of recovery in the big book. I'm talking about how we do service, how service appears, because sometimes it becomes so rigid. And I tell people all the time, if you really want to know, if you want to take a look at, how much change has not happened in your district or your area, just use 2000, because by 2000, I could tell you most districts or areas were at least using square discs, okay, for their minutes. Before that, it was pretty haphazard. There was still some typewriters, there was still some. But if you can go back to the minutes that exist for your area or district, as far as you can go back, sometimes it's shocking when you take a look at it and you're like, oh, wow. The district meeting is on Wednesday night, always. And it starts at 7 o'clock. And this is the order of reports that we do, and it shall never change. And God forbid, nothing will ever be fun. Fun is outlawed. And sometimes we become, because when you think about it, Alcoholics Anonymous service, going 40 years doesn't seem that long ago now, but when you go back to prior to the 90s, and every once in a while you run into somebody who was serving back then, our whole structure was built, and again, my comments are not political, they're factual about where we come from. Our whole structure was built around men who worked 9 to 5. The whole thing was built around them being able to go to district meetings at night and them being able to go to assemblies on the weekend. That's just a fact. I'm not making that up. That's just where we come from. And, I am so grateful for the hybrid and virtual. I'm not saying it should be or it shouldn't be. I'm just grateful that maybe somebody who works nights could maybe be a DCM. I'm grateful for maybe someone who works midnights could be a corrections chair. I'm grateful that maybe there's a way we can get more people involved, because if we keep doing what we've always done, we get so afraid to say that something we do doesn't work. And it drives me kind of crazy, because the whole premise of our fellowship is you can't fix something unless you find out what's wrong. That's the universal principle. But sometimes we get so caught up. And, when it says, like I said, the role of recovery and service, there's an old story that goes like this. There was this man named Tom I. And Tom spent a lot of years in prison as a young man. And when he got out, which was like in the 60s, and they let him leave Michigan and go back to North Carolina, he became fascinated with this guy who was sober like 15 years. And he traveled all over the Southeast speaking at AA events. Now, no air conditioning, Atlanta, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina, driving in the summer. Tom would drive everywhere with this guy, everywhere with him. And that guy drank. And that drove Tom crazy for a long time. And about 10 years later, Tom was at a convention, and he was at a podium like I am now, except he was sitting like right here. And the chairperson was at the microphone waiting to start the meeting. And what does Tom see? But he sees that guy, his hero, sitting in the second to last row. And Tom says to the chairperson, "Yo, you got to hold this thing up like 5 or 10 minutes. If I start talking, that guy, knowing him, may be gone before the end of the meeting. He is not a preamble to prayer. He might be gone, and I got to talk to him." And so Tom went out to this audience and asked, they stepped outside into the parking lot or the lobby. And Tom said to him, "You know, I got to know, like, what happened? You were my hero. Like, you were everything to me. And it's driven me crazy that you drank. And it scared me." And he said, "So could you just tell me what happened?" And Tom would tell the story that the guy just looked right at him, and he said, "Well, I made the podium my home group." And I tell that story because in AA service, I have seen, and maybe been guilty of it a time myself or two, of making the district or the assembly your home group. And there is nothing good that can happen from that for Alcoholics Anonymous. Nothing. We talk about bringing service back to our groups, but we need to bring recovery from our groups back to service. And, you know, when we talk about, like, you can burn out. There's, you know, I'd be curious with this crowd if I did a little survey. If you know who the person is or have heard of them, just raise your hand. So I'm going to say one, I'll say a couple of names. Bill D., AA number 3. Who's heard of him? A lot of people. Okay. Hank Parkhurst. Ton of people know who Hank is. Gotcha. Bobby Berger. Exactly. Like 4 people. That is so insane and drives me so crazy. Because none of us would be here without Bobby B. None of us. I was in New Zealand in the fall, and this guy took me. They don't have a big fancy office in New Zealand, an AA office. But he took me to the house where the first guy in AA lived, and then he took me to like this little kind of meeting location where they have a closet where they keep some of their archives, and he said, "And this is it." And he took this piece of paper out and like this plastic cover. And it was the first letter from GSO to the person who wrote for help in New Zealand. The first one. And the letter was from Bobby B. See, most people don't know that if you read Bill and Lois's Christmas letters from the 40s, most of them are always signed, "Love Bill, Lois, and Bobby." Bobby, B-O-B-B-I-E. When Bill was having difficulties in the 40s, Bobby Berger kept that office alive. She was the first national secretary, what we would call the general manager today, was Bobby Berger. You know, we love to like talk about how great we are, but our history's not always that great, and we should embrace the parts that are not great. We shouldn't be like ashamed of it. The book was a total failure. The book couldn't have been a bigger failure when it was published. Not to mention that Bill and Hank Parkhurst sold worthless stock certificates that today we would call an SEC violation or indictment. They sold worthless stock certificates to people in AA to get money to produce this book that wound up sitting in a storage facility only about 50 miles north of here in New Jersey because it wasn't selling. And then the Saturday Evening Post article happened, which blew the doors off of AA. There was so many inquiries, the AA number wasn't even listed. It was an unlisted number at GSO. So people wrote. Bobby Berger worked 16, 18 hours a day. If you read AA Comes of Age, or some of the books we've published, you'd need a microphone, you'd need like an electron microscope to find us mentioning Bobby. She was like written out of AA history. If you were to go to Australia and get their history book, the whole book is about, thank God for this lady named Bobby. And, you know, because tragically, Bobby broke down. Bobby, in the minute, says reverted back to alcoholism. Bobby took her own life. And listen, I know it was a different time and she was a woman and we don't like to talk about those things. Oh my God, the national secretary of AA. And you know, like when we look about what she did during those 8 or so years she worked for us, the miracles are just by the thousands, like so many other countries and places in the United States. If you've never heard of Bobby B, like I was so happy, finally, in Vancouver this year, there was a section in the archives room for Bobby, because she used to be like persona non grata. And there's a new book called The Fantastic Communicator that you could get if you went to Amazon or somewhere like that. And it talks about her life and what she did for AA, which is just, you know, beyond belief. But I'm being taped right now, right? Is there any chance it can be turned off for a second? So, you know, people talk about anonymity not being important anymore, but I'll tell you it's important. You know, 2 weeks ago in another part of the country, 2 trusted servants from a district went home after dinner, and it was a murder-suicide. So I'm pretty sure they were not bringing recovery to service. Now, I'm not judging them. I'm horrified by what happened. You can turn it back on. But it is super important that your recovery is way more important than any title in AA service. Way more important. And, you know, I've learned so many lessons, good and bad, in AA service. I've learned so many things about myself that I don't like. And I've learned lots of places where I need to improve. But that is really, you know, the spiritual growth that comes from doing service. I mean, we have 2 books in AA, basically, right? I mean, we have a lot of literature. But if we wanted to say we have 2, but we have the big book and the 12 and 12, right? I'm not here to argue which one you do the steps out of, which one you like better. None of my business. But I will tell you this. In the book on my left, the big book, it says we have about 2 million members. Give or take, we always update it. In the book on the right, in the section on the 8th step, there's a line that says, defective relations with other human beings are almost always the root of our cause of our problems, right? If they were in the same book, it would basically say we have 2 million people that don't get along with other people, right? I mean, if they were in the same book, right? So when you're able to get something done in Alcoholics Anonymous, as painful as it can be, it really is amazing. And I've learned so much that there really are no emergencies. That's a great one to learn. It's helped me in so many parts of my life and in doing service in other places, like not having an agenda or not being a one-person thing for like there's this big agenda, but I'm only interested in this little thing, and I'm going to fight like crazy for it. Like, I've had so many opportunities to grow. The other thing I've learned is that who we elect is super important, and it might not be our sponsor or our friend. Like, we have to elect the people who are going to do the best job for Alcoholics Anonymous. A couple of other things I just wanted to mention, especially on, is that the district used to be now, obviously, this district is obviously on fire, which is amazing. Not every district is like that. But again, if you would have talked to people back 40 years ago, they would tell you that the district was the most important block in the AA triangle. Like, that this was the boots on the ground doing the work in the local area that the groups couldn't handle, that the district did. And somewhere along the line, we became very centralized. And that's, in my opinion, not been good for Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, good active districts are super what's important. And I would also tell you that we have to make sure that we just don't get together for the sake of getting together. Nothing drives a GSR crazier or sends a person running back from service if they think that you just have them come into a meeting so that you could say you had a meeting. Like, there has to be a purpose, and things have to be happening. I do this thing on Saturday mornings with the Russian trustees, and on Monday afternoon with the Iranian trustees, and go through the concepts and the traditions, and their questions are always, can we? I'm like, of course, you can do whatever you want. Or their better question is always, can they do that, Billy? Meaning some group that's off the reservation that they don't like, and like they're so into like rule making and everything else, and then they start hearing, like I always say, like, when there's a problem in a foreign country's AA, like if they have a little bit of a problem going on, it's usually one of two causes. Because I've had the privilege of helping a lot of other countries. Like, the first cause is if their Bill and Bob is still alive. If their Bill and Bob is still alive, there's no work that can be done until they die, okay? Because while they're alive, there'll be no group conscience. Everything they say is the final word. They have unlimited authority, so that's number one. The second cause is usually an American circuit speaker, right? That somebody has become under the influence of some American, and they're hearing all these things. Like now this is with Iran, just 2 days ago, yesterday, Monday afternoon. Billy, one of our groups is having a dance, and we heard that is definitely not okay. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Because the first international convention where the traditions were passed in Cleveland in 1950 had 3 dances. So it's very interesting that someone is telling you that you definitely can't have a dance in AA, right? Or the 23rd Street Clubhouse in New York City had a dance. Like, I really kind of, miss some of the real old-timers. Like, the way to get people active in service is to make service fun. The way to get people who think service is just politics or whatever else, or think it's not going to help with your spiritual growth, is to not be afraid to have events about recovery. The district used to be the glue that kept a bunch of groups together. That was the district's job. And somehow or another, in certain places that has gone away. And I have seen miracles in the service structure as far as the work that we can do and get done, but sometimes our rigidness about being so afraid of change. We're so afraid to try something different. And I think one of the greatest pages or 2 pages in our literature in the service manual is the introduction of the concepts, not even the concepts. Because there Bill says, is everything we've said hardened down in gospel? And he says, no. We should be willing to try something new. Maybe we do it on a test case. I remember, this is a true story. I remember in 2009 or 10, a trustee sitting across from me at a table saying, Billy, alcoholics will never give money electronically through the computer. I said, oh, okay. They will never give money. I think it was like 1.2 million last year. If we didn't have electronic contributions, no money would come in. But we're always behind the times when it comes to technology and harnessing technology. And I'm not a person that wants to replace what we do with technology. I just want to use it to reach more people. Like, we have to be where the newcomer goes. I was in Oklahoma not too many years ago when a 19-year-old woman went up to the microphone and said that she came home from a party like at 4 o'clock in the morning, and her parents grounded her again, and she was drunk. And she Googled the next day, I'm a teenage girl and I can't stop drinking. And finally, thank God, because our search engine optimization is horrible usually, but thank God she found the Houston Intergroup website and made a phone call. And 2 days later, 2 women, 2 days after that night, 2 women picked her up and took her to a first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I remember a Class A non-alcoholic trustee saying to us in like 2006, when people were so anti-technology and anti-computer, and she looked right at us and said, if AA is not where the newcomer goes to look for help, AA will become irrelevant. It will not be relevant in society anymore. And, you know, I think about those things because the reason we're so behind in technology is because the people in the early 2000s who were making the technology decisions didn't use technology. And that's just, you know, it's a big problem. You know, I'm a Panel 49 delegate. So think about that. If you don't know what a panel is, I'm glad. You should consider yourselves lucky. But I'm a Panel 49 delegate. So that means I served as a delegate in 1999. The last I checked, in 1999, the year I served as a delegate, so there's 45 delegates from Panel 49. There's like 6 left alive. But you got to think about it. The average age of a delegate in 1999 was like 58. You're talking about a 58-year-old who at one time in their life smoked 3 packs a day of Pall Mall no filter, okay? That's who the delegate was in 1998, all right? That's who was there, right? Like, there's not a long lifespan after, you know, even if you got 20 years, you're not alive today, right? But when you think about that, think about in 2000 and 2005 and 2010, the average age of a delegate hadn't gone down. And some of those people, they were not using BlackBerries. They were not using computers. They were not embracing email. And so it's taken us a lot to catch up. And, you know, I'll end with this, you know, about spiritual growth and recovery. Like, there's a young chairperson that I ran into on a CPC committee. And, you know, he is so wise, and I hope some people steal his ideas, some people already, but he realized, like, wow, I was always told to have these events, these service events on the weekend, but I could never get professionals to come because they work during the week most of the time. Why are they going to, if you invite a judge or a probation officer or whoever? And so he started having this once a month lunchtime CPC reach out to professionals, where judges and probation officers and principals and other people don't even have to leave their office. They just go on Zoom and eat lunch and hear a CPC presentation, and he has like quadrupled attendance in like a short amount of time. And I only say that because, again, we send a mixed message in service, and I know that I've been guilty of it, but I try not to be guilty of it anymore as much as I can. We go out everywhere and we say, we need more people in service. We need more help. We need more volunteers. We need more people. But then someone comes to a service event and they commit like a Class A AA felony. They brought a new idea. See, we asked you to come. We didn't want your new idea, okay? We didn't want your new idea. But I'm going to share something and then shut up here about the power that we have of being advocates for people getting involved in service. And instead of extinguishing their flames, of being able to maybe even let them crash a few times. I already mentioned John Q, but let me mention the other past trustee who's passed away, John S. from the Jersey Shore. You know, I can't go by the Shoreline Club without thinking about John. And, you know, John's trustee resume form said he owned an Irish bar. I'm just letting you know that, right? It was on his trustee resume form that he still was a bar owner, and he drove a truck for the phone company, and he was a die-hard, great guy on the front lines who would welcome anyone into Alcoholics Anonymous. But I want to tell you of a true Area 44 assembly story in the early 2000s, because I came here for work in 2002. I had met John and John through service, and I was at this Area 44 assembly, and there was a new woman who was the DCM, you have like a position, DCM coordinator, right? Or, not section coordinator, at the area level. Like DCM workshop coordinator, right. And this young woman went to the microphone, and she committed like 3 AA felonies in a row. She had like 3 new ideas. And unfortunately, a past delegate went to a microphone and took this young woman's head off. And I remember sitting there. I was a past delegate at the time. I don't think I had started to serve as an appointed committee member yet, but he took her head off. And you could see all the passion and energy and light leave her face. And I tell this story about John S. because, you know, I'd seen John and John in so many places over the years, but like, I never really saw him go to the microphone at the Area 44 Assembly and introduce himself as a past Northeast Regional Trustee or past delegate. He was just said hello to people. But you know, that day he got up to the microphone. And that day he did introduce himself, and he said, "My name is John." I can't say his last name, but he did. And he said, "My name is John, and I'm a past delegate from Northern New Jersey and a past Northeast Regional Trustee." And he said, "Young lady, I can't wait for your next report. I can't wait to hear you come back and tell us how your ideas are going. Because obviously maybe some of the things we were doing aren't working." And you could see the air go back into her and her passion go back into her. And sometimes we get so caught up in correcting and doing things perfectly and everything else that we want to stifle the energy that's life-saving in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the best way you can do that is, instead of worrying about bringing service back to your group, is about bringing recovery from your group to service, because that's the name of the game. So thank you very much. It's glad to be here.
All right, thank you. And we just have a couple minutes here. And with that, I really just wanted to bring up Roger.